This will be posted later on YouTube at the you can find it off of our webpage under the Getting Started in Training section. But this will be recorded and posted later for later reference, and just for showing other people, like if you want to go back to your faculty and be like, hey, we should do this, you can have them watch this as well as give them the information you accumulate here. So what is XSEDE? XSEDE stands for the Extreme Science and Engineering Discovery Environment. It focuses on high-performance computing simulation type resources. It is really a way for researchers around the country to be able to apply for and get time on large systems. The places where I see it being used for is, I'm seeing it heavily used for classroom work. XSEDE will support classroom work. So if you're a TA or a professor teaching a course and you'd like to have some HPC resources and your department either doesn't have funding for using Flux, or you want to use a different type of resource, if your application works on XSEDE, you can generally get up and going on XSEDE in a week or two. So you just need to kind of plan a little bit ahead before your students need to use it, but you can definitely use XSEDE for the classroom use. If you want to use it for classroom use and you want to have a little session about how to use it specifically for your application to your students, let me know, and I'm more than happy to come by and give a little presentation of here's XSEDE and here's the resource you're going to be using, and here's an example of how to submit a job to that resource. But the primary use of XSEDE by far nationally is for actual research. So it is computational type work. It is far and wide the different type of work that's being supported by XSEDE. Physics, astronomy, medical use, all sorts of different things. So how I see it being used is if the local resources don't work for you, XSEDE has resources different than those that are available to the researcher only on campus. There's a wide variety of different types of computational and storage resources. The other use I see it for is the way the policies are set up on some of the machines here on campus are, if the machine's large, you don't necessarily have access to a large fraction of the machine, or the machine you are on that you have access to most of it, the machine is relatively small. So if you want to do work where you want to scale a parallel job to a larger number of cores, XSEDE is a good use for that. So it's both good for people who are budget constrained, people who have different types of needs in terms of physical resources, as well as people who have different policy needs, such as the ability to run, say, a 10,000 or a 50,000 processor job, as opposed to a 12 or 16. XSEDE definitely supports 12 or 16. In fact, most jobs actually are, small, handful of core parallel jobs, if running parallel jobs. There's even resources that are designed specifically for serially use. They're not even optimized for running parallel applications. So if you're just running a serial job, you're good for that too. So I want to actually touch on some of the resources that are available to kind of whet your appetite for what you could possibly be using. So on the XSEDE.org webpage that we're looking at here, you can see that there is a resources tab, and you see a couple different types here. You see high performance computing, high throughput computing, visualization. And yes, their visualization equipment are set up to support remote visualization. You can use their resources with high-powered graphics cards and high quantities of memory, maybe directly attached to the storage system where your simulation was stored after it finished, and then see the results projected back on your local workstation or on the 3D Lab or Arcane workstation. The 3D Lab has this nice 3x3 tile display that runs 4x HD resolution, and we have ran simulations visualized on that 3x3 tile display, and anybody has access to this on campus, that were actually visualized off of XSEDE resources in Tennessee, and it actually works quite well. You'd be quite surprised. Storage, test beds for unique and novel types of technologies going forward, and also to have information about different networking and software that's available. Software, there was a question earlier about software available on XSEDE. Every resource is different. There's a lot of open source packages and public domain packages available. All the resources provide an optimized MPI library, or more than one, as well as a compiler, more than one. A lot of commercial applications, though, beyond a compiler and MPI library, XSEDE's much more limited than what we have on, say, like Flux on campus, just because licensing those and the restrictions on them can be quite cost prohibitive, or hard to enforce the policies of those licenses. So definitely do some research. Contact me, Brock, at hpc-support@umich.edu. If you are curious about something. You can also look on this list, but this list is by far not definitive. Also, sometimes, say you have a license for VASP. VASP is a commercial code, but once you have a license for it, you can run it where you want, but you need some help getting it running there. I can help you with that. A lot of the different sites for these common applications provide support for getting those common scientific licensed applications running on their resources. They won't provide the license for you. You need to have that sometimes. So there's less commercial software there, but there's workarounds. Like, example, MATLAB. Some of the resources have limited MATLAB functionality. We have lots of MATLAB functionality available locally on Flux. One thing we can do is there's something called the MATLAB compiler, where we can work your code locally, turn it into a standalone executable that doesn't require a MATLAB license, and then run it on an XSEDE resource. So that way you can actually write MATLAB code and develop it here on campus, and then take it and run it many times without using MATLAB licenses on XSEDE resources, which is quite a nice feature. So before you write off XSEDE saying like, oh, well, my software won't run on it, you'd be sure to contact us and talk to us first, and we'll explore all avenues to make sure that your application will work on it. So the high-performance computing resources obviously are the most popular ones. They're traditional supercomputers, clusters, and MMP systems. The high-throughput computing, this is like Condor pools. The high-throughput computing I'm going to touch on here real quick is in partnership with the Open Science Grid and Purdue, though the Purdue Condor pool is approaching end of life, so I would recommend, if you're applying for this, to definitely apply for Open Science Grid. This is a unique system in that it's volunteer computing. It's a lot of systems around the country that are mostly supporting high-energy physics that are providing their resources available to others when they're not in use. I have researchers who are running on both Purdue Condor Pool and Open Science Grid. They're serial jobs only, no parallel jobs, but they'll run many thousands of serial jobs simultaneously. So if you have a parameter sweep where you have, say, 10,000 different parameters, you could submit all 10,000 parameters to Open Science Grid through an XSEDE award, and there's a chance that several thousand of them will run simultaneously, and thus you could be done in a fraction of the time compared to running all 10,000 of those on a single workstation. So that's a little different. That's why it's called high throughput computing. It's meant for running lots of independent things. Now, if your workflow is more complicated, but they do have independent units, there's support for these workflow tools like Pegasus or Dagman, where you can set up a dependency tree where you could have, like, say, 20 preprocessor jobs and then 50,000 worker jobs that have to wait till after the preprocessor jobs, and then, say, 20 post-processor jobs that run afterwards, and you can make these chain of dependencies where you have these big fan-outs, and the system runs it all for you in the correct order. So let's talk about the high-performance computing resources specifically. Stampede is the newest and largest resource that's currently available. It makes heavy use of the Intel, it says here, MIC, the MIC, Mini Integrated Core. It's now known as the Intel Xeon Phi. You can think of it as an accelerator card, sometimes compared to people who are doing work on GPUs. Most of the performance actually comes from MIC, but the actual system itself has a very large number of cores. So Stampede here is, a combination of Phis and mics. You can see a picture here. It's very large. I'm trying to find the total number of cores they have here, but it's in the tens of thousands of cores. And then, many of these Intel Phi cards too. So if you were interested in, okay, so it's 6,400 nodes, each with 16 cores. So it gives you an idea of just how many cores there really are. There's 32 gigs of memory per core, and there's a 14 petabyte scratch file system. So that's 28 times larger than our local scratch file system. And it's all connected with InfiniBand to give you good parallel performance between the machines. So if you were interested in using the Intel Phi, you don't have to buy one. You can actually just get an award and run on Stampede. But you can also use Stampede without using the Phis. You don't have to, because as you see, they have 6400 times 16 processor cores in the system. So we're definitely into over 60,000 processor cores. So this machine is currently in the top 10, I believe, for the fastest machines in the world. I want to say it's somewhere around 10 or 11 petaflops. So this is definitely, I mean, this is a world-class machine in terms of the aggregate performance. Blacklight is a unique machine at the Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center. It is a shared memory machine. So what's unique about this is that all the memory in the system is available. So instead of having to use an MPI code to use, say, a terabyte of RAM, this machine has 32 terabytes of memory. It's 4,096 cores and 32 terabytes of RAM under one Linux image. So you could, in theory, run a single processor application or a threaded application, a shared memory application, not rewrite it to use distributed memory like MPI. And if you don't know what these things are, don't worry about it. If you have questions, let me know. You can put it into the chat box and Matt can help you out, or I can get back to you later. But the point is, if you have an application that can only run on one computer, this machine is only one computer. It is not a cluster. It is one single computer, and thus one process can access this massive amount of memory. Or you can run a threaded application on 1,000 threads rather than the usual 16 or 32 threads you can get on a normal, you could say, normal cluster node out there. So this is another unique type of resource that's not available on campus, definitely not at this scale, that could definitely be useful in some people's cases. Sometimes it's nice if you have an application that's running very slow because of I/O, that is, reading and writing from files, or just using scratch space because there's not enough physical memory. You can actually use the memory in this system as a file system, and thus the memory is much faster than talking to disk. And so you can just use it as a RAM disk and actually get stuff done at orders of magnitude faster than you would normally. Gordon is unique in that it's a traditional cluster. It's definitely not the size of Stampede, but it's unique in the fact that the nodes have flash disk attached to them. So they have really high performance I/O characteristics for local file I/O because it uses flash. I've done some things. It's a traditional cluster, but you can also set up Hadoop on demand on this. You can create a Hadoop file system on the fly and run MapReduce jobs on Gordon using the flash disk actually as your storage. Otherwise, it actually works pretty well as a traditional cluster platform. It has InfiniBand for parallel communication, and it's a pretty good all-around system for general use. Keeneland's unique in that it is a GPU system. It has, as you see here, has over 200 nodes with 3 GPUs per node. So we're looking at 600 GPUs, and they're all tied together and support GPU direct. So parallel jobs using GPUs. Keeneland's definitely an interesting resource. So if you're curious about doing GPU work, so Stampede had the Intel Phis, which are different. These are NVIDIA GPUs. So this would be like CUDA, OpenCL, OpenAAC, and other types of things that are implemented on GPUs. So codes that use GPUs well are things like molecular dynamics codes like HUMD, AMBER, GROMACS. FEA codes that work well are like the MSC tools, ANSYS. You get into licensing issues, but we can definitely work on that in terms of how to get access to these. And those codes all take advantage of the GPUs for some cases. That's one thing you have to watch out for with GPUs, is whether or not your application takes advantage of the GPU for the solver you're using, and how well does it take advantage of it. Kraken used to be the biggest system on the machine. It's over 100,000 cores. The cores are individually getting a little slow, but it is a Cray XT5. So the network here for parallel communication between the cores is probably the best you will be able to get your hands on currently. So running 80,000 processor jobs, I've seen it done. I have a couple of researchers that regularly run 4,000 processor jobs on Kraken. They used to run 32 processor jobs here, and now they actually burn through over 1 million CPU hours every quarter on Kraken by running these 4,000 to 8,000 processor jobs. So if you're curious in just doing scaling tests, you're not interested in single core performance, but you want to know exactly how your performance maintains percentage-wise, going from 1 to 100 to 200 to 1,000 cores to 4,000 to 10,000 cores. Kraken is definitely a nice platform for that. There's a lot of details here about how to use it and how it's set up. Again, I can help you with any of these things if you have questions. Being the campus champion, I have access to all of these resources and I can help you out. Lone Star is unique in that it is almost identical to Flux. It is the same CPU. It is the same network. The difference is it has the amount of memory per node. It only has 24 gigs of RAM in a node. But most people don't need the full 48 gigs of RAM or 64 gigs of RAM. So Lone Star, if you're already using Flux, Lone Star is a very nice, easy thing to move over to. Your optimizations for the processor and everything are pretty much the same. It's relatively large. I think it's around 50,000 processors. And then there's some other resources here that are available to do, large memory. Mason here, these machines have a 0.5 terabyte of RAM each. Steel's an older machine that lets you run longer jobs, and Trestles has some flash and some other resources to kind of get fast turnaround time. So that's the physical machine resources. There's also something unique in XSEDE called Advanced User Support. Actually, they don't call it that anymore. But basically what it is oh, they moved it. Extended collaborative support. You can actually get an XSEDE programming expert to help you with your problem. So if, say you have an existing application, you're trying to scale it or trying to figure out what to do, but it's much more involved than just throwing it on a machine and running it and getting help, getting that, it running on that machine, that existing code. Say you actually want to modify it. When you submit an XSEDE application, you can actually ask for so many person months to get support through the ECCS program, the Extended Collaborative Support. So it's very common for somebody to get 1 person month in their proposal, along with their CPU hours, to get time with somebody to work together on their application, to either parallelize it, scale it, port it, any number of things. And you can find lots of details here on this webpage. So that's a unique resource. And again, I am, the campus champion, so I am the representative on campus. I reside up on North Campus, but I'll come down to your classroom or wherever you need to be able to help you out with XSEDE activities. There is a software listing, as I pointed out before. Again, there's some caveats with that. Don't trust that list as being definitive. So one thing I want to talk about now is, okay, so I keep mentioning allocations. It doesn't cost anything to use XSEDE, but there is a limitation. You do have to request time on it. It is an NSF resource. XSEDE is NSF funded, National Science Foundation. But again, you don't have to be NSF affiliated, either in support or in general, to use XSEDE. NIH users use it, DOE users use it. It is not a requirement by far. Also, don't think of it as like a grant where you get money. Well, you can, because obviously the CPU hours are worth a significant amount of money. But most requests get an award. It is very easy to get CPU time. So if you go through the effort and you have your ducks all in a row in terms of your research, which, if you're at a tier 1 university like Michigan or another institution or affiliated with one, generally you already have all that information together. Getting an XSEDE award will be quite easy. They may not give you everything you asked for. If you ask for 1 million hours and in your proposal, and they decide they don't have that many, but they really like what you're doing, and they give you 500,000, well, that's still 500,000 CPU hours you didn't have before. And you can always apply again the next round. So how do you actually get access? So when you go to the actual XSEDE.org webpage, you'll see something over on the side here that says sign in. This is the XSEDE portal. You need to get a portal account before you begin. So you just click here and say create account, and you create your account. And once you have your account, you can log in and you can actually fill out a proposal and submit it. just follow the instructions here. There's no restrictions on like U.S. citizens or anything like that for getting access to XSEDE. So go ahead and fill out the XSEDE user portal account, and that'll let you log in. So I already have an account, so I'm going to log in. And once I've logged in, oh, why did it not log in correctly? Let's try this again. Okay, so now that I'm in the user portal, and you get lots of information here. You can see here's all my allocations. So you can see I have 30,000 hours awarded on blacklight, of which I've used 88 hours of. So I've got most of mine remaining. And they'll give you an idea of, it'll tell you when your allocation on that machine's done, and also how much longer they think that your allocation is going to last based on how quickly you're going through it. So you can see how many hours you have left. I say hours, you see it here marked as SU. A service unit is 1 core hour on that resource. So you can transfer core hours between machines. If you get an award and say you have access to a machine where the CPUs are slow, but you have many CPUs, they'll give you more CPU hours, but you want to transfer it to a different machine that you found worked better. They let you do that, but they're going to normalize your CPU hours. That is, if they think that machine is twice as fast per core, they're going to give you half the number of CPU hours. Total computation-wise, it should be equal, and so if in your application that platform works better than that difference, and there's a calculator on the website. I'm not going to show it to you, but there is a calculator on the website, so you can get an idea. It'll let you know whether or not that resource is definitely better. So you can see everything here. This is also where a researcher can add and remove users from their allocation. So once you get an award, you can see here I have an award. If I want to add somebody to it, I just say add user. I choose my award. And then I just type in that user's portal username. So if you have a new member join your lab that's working on the same project that you have an XSEDE award for, because the award's for the science, and normally you want to fill it out under the PI's name. So there's going to have a PI is going to have a login for this, and a research scientist is totally fine, or a postdoc or somebody managing this is totally fine. Graduate students can fill these out, but generally they're individual awards. But then you can go ahead and have that new user get an XSEDE portal account, and once they have their portal account, you can type in their name here, and you can pick which resources to add them to. So you can add them to a specific machine, and you can remove them later also if you need to, like if they leave your lab or something like that. So you do that, and there's tons of documentation and other stuff in here. So to actually get an allocation, go to the allocation tab and just say submit and review request. So they have a little bit of summary here. So let me give you a little bit of an idea of the different types of awards that are made. There's startups, educational, those are the classroom accounts, and there's research allocations. So startup allocations is what I recommend most of you to do. They're open year-round. That is, you can submit them whenever you need, and they're constantly being reviewed. You can see here 2 or 3 weeks, they're generally reviewed. So it generally, and it's closer to 2 weeks actually. So if you submit a startup allocation and it's reasonable and all your stuff's together, within 2 weeks you're normally going to have an award, and you're going to be able to start logging into a system and start trying to do some work. Startups are limited. You say here they're not normally renewable. You generally get 1 startup per science. Remember, the award is for the science. So if you're a professor and in your lab you have 2 different projects going on, you can submit a proposal for project A and a proposal for project B and get 2 different awards. So submit a startup proposal. You're limited to 200,000 CPU hours. Now if you think about that, that's actually worth quite a bit of money. This is worth several $1,000s, and they just hand these things out. So this is really easy computation money when you think about it. Individual resources will have a limit. On the resource catalog page, it will tell you that there's a startup limit per resource. So say Gordon may only let you have 30,000 CPU hours on Gordon for a startup. For a research allocation, you can ask for whatever. But for a startup, they may limit how much they give you. So a resource like Kraken, though, they'll let you have all 200,000 hours on that big machine because it's big, so they can fit a lot onto it. In total, though, all the resources you ask for in your startup cannot exceed 200,000 hours. So while Gordon may only let you have 50,000 or 30,000 hours, you could get 50,000 on Gordon, 50,000 on Blacklight, and 100,000 on Kraken, and that would be a legit startup request, and you could test out the different resources and see how they're used. Like I said, these are reviewed constantly. Educational, these are for the class. They're basically the same idea as a startup allocation, but there's no limit. Like if you teach the same class every semester or every calendar year or every other year, you can keep submitting these for that same class and they will keep awarding you the grant for doing the classroom work. Just be sure, to talk with me and we can get your students trained for the class to be able to do their classwork, because they'll all need to get portal accounts and be added to your allocation to be able to get on that machine. So the one that's probably most interesting is the research allocation. You notice here, no service unit limit. So you can ask for whatever you want. 1,000,000 hours or more is not uncommon. But so also is just getting another 200,000. Awards only last a year. So while your project may last multiple years, they're going to want an update of what's been going on and what you've been able to accomplish with the resources they gave you every year. So the award they give you is only good for a year. And then you need to submit another one. You can use a lot of information from your previous one. You can also sometimes ask for an extension, but generally it's better to put together and ask for another year because a lot of you are here multiple years, so you'll be going through this process multiple times. Submissions are only accepted 4 times a year, and you can see here's when the submission open dates are, so December 15th. So the next one coming up is going to be June 15th. So June 15th, they're going to start accepting applications, and you have until July 15th for a research proposal. Once you have a research proposal in, if they accept it, October 1st is when your resources will start. So you can ask for an advance even before you're awarded, which is kind of weird, but they'll do that. You can ask for an advance, and that's on the website. And they have examples here also of successful requests. But your award will start October 1st, and you will have until October 1st to burn through all your hours. So you can see that's only done 4 times a year. So the startups and the educations, they can be done whenever, but the research proposals, the big ones, are only done 4 times a year. So you need to plan ahead a little bit, because you need to plan ahead to get your proposal together and get it in, and then realize that it's going to be a couple of months before it actually starts after you get your award. So on here also they're going to tell you like how many things they're willing to give out. So like here, Kraken, they're giving out 200 million hours at the next meeting. So that's interesting because this is 4 times a year. So that basically tells me that they're giving out 600 million CPU hours on Kraken every year. Okay, so what actually goes into a proposal? So here, let's actually go to POPs, which is what happens when I click on this button. And I can say submit a startup request, submit an education request, or submit a Champions request. And then you can also get the research requests on here also. So I'm just going to go ahead and click a new startup request. They're the same as anything else. So it's basically put in your information, the PI information, put in any co-PIs, attach an abstract. If you do have NSF grants, they're going to want to know what they are, just to get an idea of what kind of work NSF is supporting. So do include that information. It does not influence your decision whether or not you're getting a grant much. The really large projects it will, into the tens of millions of hours, but otherwise, like I said, you don't have to be NSF affiliated or supported to use this. And then you fill in your resource request, and so this is actually pretty simple. You just come to this form, and they're going to want some survey information. Are you going to use this for production, exploration, or education? How do you plan to submit jobs, etc. But then there's all the different resources, and really all you do is, so like here, since this is a startup, this is the okay, so here's Keeneland. This is the GPU system. service units, because this is a startup, it says I can't request more than 10,000 CPU hours on this one for a startup. So you basically just go through, and for each system you want, you type in the number of hours you want, and they'll come back and at the end and tell you how many they'll actually give you after about 2 weeks. So you can see it's pretty simple. You just fill in the information. Also, notice the save progress. You don't have to sit down and fill this out all at once. You can sit down, fill in all the pieces you need that you have information for, maybe on behalf of your professor or a postdoc or something like that, and then come back with them later, 2 days from now, resume the proposal. They'll let you do that on the front page there, and then fill in the last piece of information and click finalize. So everything's done online. There's no mailing anything in, nothing like that. Startup requests, what kind of things are you looking for? It's an abstract. It's pretty small. You know, they're gonna want some survey what you're doing, some keywords, but the key is you just paste it in. You don't attach documents or anything like that. You basically, for a startup, need an abstract of the work you're doing and your CV or resume. That's it. Those two things are sufficient. Research allocations require more justification. They're going to want information, and look at the documentation on the XSEDE website. They're going to want documentation of why you need that many hours for doing the work you're doing. For smaller requests, say up to 1 million hours, you know, you're looking at 3 to 5 pages. For more than that, you're looking at 5 to 7 to 12 pages. And they have guidelines on the website. If you remember in the portal, and I showed it here, they have this successful requests. They have examples of things people have submitted and what's been successful, and basically what they're looking for in a request. So when you actually go to fill it out, definitely look at this. I really want to stress though that for the allocations, when they're all done online, you don't have to do it all at once. The startup allocations, which for a lot of graduate work is sufficient, and you never need a research allocation, take very little effort. You already have an abstract of work you have done or published or put together for some proposal or something that you can pretty much copy and paste in and use for your XSEDE justification. So you copy and paste that in, attach your CV, fill in your name and information, and then in 2 weeks you'll generally have up to 200,000 CPU hours of computation available. So it's pretty easy to get access. Even the research allocations, when you think about the size of resources you're asking for a year, the effort is very low in terms of the requirements of what they're asking for, and the success rate is obscenely high compared to asking for funding from NSF to be able to buy your own resources or to pay for other resources. So this is definitely a much easier path in terms of effort for getting access to stuff. So that's actually mostly what I had on XSEDE. I do want to point out that we do have a page on the CAC website about XSEDE and TeraGrid, and you can give an idea, a little bit of overview of the XSEDE Campus Champions and links to the XSEDE portal, XSEDE resources, and XSEDE allocations. I also want to point out too that we see XSEDE not as an alternative to local resources, but actually as a complement, and that you may want to interact between, say, Flux, you know, the university cluster, and XSEDE resources, and use both of them. Maybe one for development and one for scale runs, and you need to transfer data and log in between the two. We have documentation for something called the XSEDE Client Toolkit, which is a module on Flux and the NIC systems, and this is basically lets you use your portal credentials to log in from and transfer files between Flux and NICs and XSEDE resources. We also support Globus Online for transferring large files between XSEDE and the local resources. One nice thing about using Globus Online, which you can just search for on our website, you can also use it for your own transfer and stuff, is that it lets you move data directly between our system and an XSEDE system over a private network that is at 10 gigabits a second, which is 10 times faster than my laptop's connection. And it sits on internet too, so it's significantly faster than moving other things back and forth. So it'll give you much better performance when interoperating between campus and the XSEDE resources, getting results back here. And you can also install Globus on your own machine. It's free. It's simple to install, and you do all your file transfers actually through a web page, and it emails you when your transfer is done. So large data transfers become much easier using Globus. There's also a tutorial video here on how Globus works, and actually use an XSEDE resource as an example. So that's actually everything I have. Feel free to type any questions you have into the chat box, and we can have a bit of a discussion. Otherwise, this is being recorded, and we will, encode it and upload it later. Yes, so R available on XSEDE. R, being an open source project, is basically available on all the machines. If it's not, I can help you get it installed because there's no licensing constraints for using R. So if R is not available, we can definitely get it for you, and you don't have to worry about installing it yourself. Is XSEDE available for industry? That is a good question. Can you send a ticket to HPC-support? It's a little fuzzy the last time I asked. I think there is a way. Industry-sponsored research, especially if it's published, is definitely not a problem. If it's not published, you're going to be lower down on the stack in terms of getting approved for an award. Like I said, it is federally funded through the National Science Foundation, so if it's not public research, it's an issue. Is MATLAB available on XSEDE? MATLAB's a sticky one because it is licensed software. It is available in a limited sense on some resources. But the MATLAB, we have a way of taking MATLAB code you have here, turning it into a standalone executable you can run on any machine, XSEDE or not, with or without MATLAB installed. And what's nice about that is you can compile it once and run it many times. So if you want to run MATLAB on XSEDE, talk to us so we can talk about your MATLAB code specifically. Likely we can run it, but you're going to have to do some extra steps. Yeah, so Matt's putting in the answer. Someone asked, what does a GPU stand for? It's a graphics processor unit. There's special ones that NVIDIA makes that are for computation, not for displaying graphics. They have large amounts of memory, and for certain types of operations, GPUs are many times faster and definitely many times more power efficient than a traditional CPU. For an example, my rule of thumb for molecular dynamics applications has always been that one GPU card, of the top-end GPU card, is equivalent to using 70 CPU cores. So anybody who's doing molecular dynamics work, definitely look into using a GPU accelerated version of your molecular dynamics application. Other things also take advantage of it. Ray tracers, obviously, if you're doing realistic ray tracing of publishable graphics. But we actually have GPUs on our local machines if you want to. Can XSEDE be used by researchers at universities outside the U.S.? You have to be affiliated with a U.S. institution of higher learning. So you could be a collaborator with somebody. Say you're in Canada and you're a collaborator with a researcher here at Michigan. When you fill out the application, make sure you put down both of you. There's the PI and co-PIs. Make sure that one of them's a U.S. affiliated PI. Otherwise, you're going to run into issues. Now, other countries have systems. For example, Europe has the PRACE project, which you could see is the XSEDE equivalent. The UK has their own national effort, spearheaded by Hector, but there's a couple other ones. So if you have questions, you can ask me, and I can see what I know. But definitely check out. There's other things around besides XSEDE, but XSEDE is US focused. Is there a Scratch folder XSEDE machine similar to Flux? Yes. One thing about Scratch on XSEDE machines, their Scratch are real Scratch. That is, if you leave files there for a long period of time, they will automatically delete them. But there are large parallel file systems, large Lustre file systems, or GPFS file systems that work just like No Backup or Scratch on Flux or Nix for storing large temporary data while you work on it. And so that can be shared and do large, like say, MPI-IO for parallel reads and writes, or just storing large files as you work. Some of the sites will have archive systems for actually storing data long term. What are the reporting requirements for startup and research grants? Chance of getting it applies as a PI versus a postdoc applying as a PI. Actually, I've never really thought about that before, and my gut reaction, knowing what people have been awarded, is if you're just asking for startup, non-issue at all, whether you're a student applying for your own or it's a professor applying for one. Larger projects, you're going to want to see multiple names on there and multiple people being involved for larger projects like your research grants of large scale. So the larger the thing you ask for on a research grant, the more that's going to diverge. But like I said, in 2011, which is the latest numbers I have, over 90% of XSEDE proposals got funded. I know it's gotten a little bit tighter as more people have started using it, but that's still a very high number. I mean, you're looking at 1 out of 10 not being funded as opposed to 1 out of 10 being funded when you ask NSF for money. So definitely check it out. Have I gotten everything? Do they sit in a queue as on NICS? Okay, so the thing is, NICS, you got to realize, has a very small number of public resources. If you're curious about more resources on campus, talk to us and we can talk about the option. XSEDE, it's going to vary. Every resource provider, that is the people who run the individual machines on XSEDE's behalf, has different policies. That said, on Lone Star, I submitted a 1,000 processor job as a debug test for 24 hours and it started within 2. Things generally start faster. Now, XSEDE resources work differently. They don't limit the number of CPUs you can use generally, but they let you run for shorter periods of time, so they cause more turnover. They also don't put limits on the number you can use, so if the resources are available, jobs are going to start. Should you collect... Oh, the reporting requirements. Yes, thank you. There's information on the XSEDE webpage for how to cite XSEDE. You basically just cite it as a resource like anything else. So yes, they're definitely ask that you do that, and they have examples on their website of how to do that. And it's pretty minor. It's like citing any other source. Should you collect performance data when applying for a research allocation? Yes, most definitely yes. That is the purpose in a lot of people's mind of the startup allocation, is that you use the startup to collect the information you need to find out how many resources you need to apply for. Then use that performance information to make your justification in your research proposal. So yes, definitely collect performance information while you're running on your startup. Any other pieces of information? It looks like some people are typing. Oh, Matt, thanks for pulling up the page. So again, this is being recorded, so this will be posted on the webinar section of the cac.engine.umich.edu website. It will also be posted on our YouTube page, which is here. This is where you will find them and find old ones. We are going to be doing these webinars on a regular basis, so watch your email for as we announce those. Also, you can always visit the webinar room and we will have the next session posted. So the next session is at the same time, 1:30 to 2:30. Was it May? Yeah, May 30th, and we're going to be covering basic Linux command line tools, part 1. This was a very popular thing last year for people who are just getting started using Linux platforms. So this will teach you how to manipulate files, navigate the file system, and stuff like that. Again, if you have any questions, let us know at hpc-support@umich.edu. Also, XSEDE has their own support that you can ask for getting clarifications on things, which is just help@xsede.org. You can contact them. if you ever do something with help@xsede.org and you're not satisfied with what happened or what the answer was, or you're not sure what they had is right, you can always send it to HPC-support where I'll see it. Being the campus champion, I am your advocate at XSEDE. I communicate those people. I will be at the XSEDE conference this year in San Diego, which is my opportunity to bash them over the head for things that I didn't think they were doing well as get feedback from what other people are doing. So please, anytime you have issues or questions about XSEDE, please send them my way. But you can also send them straight to XSEDE. You don't have to go through me if you don't want to. Again, thank you very much for attending this. We're going to be posting more of these, and you can find us at cac.engine.umich.edu. But we are available to and have contacts for all the departments and colleges at the University of Michigan. So do not think that we are engineers only. That's just where our office is. We're here to help everybody. So thanks a lot, everybody.